Hey, it's Sam Matler. In this video, we're going to talk about indecision, analysis paralysis, overthinking. Whatever you want to call it, it's a cycle that most of us fall into time and time again. I'm going to break down the nature of indecision, why it holds you back, how it holds you back, and then I'll share with you a powerful mental tool that you can use to make decisions and take action with confidence and speed. I know every YouTuber says this, but it's important you watch to the end. Not just so I can get more attention and views, but because the tool that I just mentioned, the tool I'm going to share with you, is extremely powerful. It's one that I use myself and it changed the game for me. So if you're not going to watch the first half of the video, at least watch the second half. But the first half is going to help you understand and kind of set the context for why that tool will work so well. So indecision, overthinking, analysis paralysis is driven largely by fear. Specifically, the fear of loss. This might sound strange, but let me explain. When you're faced with a choice between two or more options, committing to one of them means losing out on something. It means losing out on the benefits of the other choices. For example, by deciding to make this YouTube video today, I lost out on the option of going to the beach at the same time. Wasn't a hard decision to make because it's raining outside and it's a little bit cold. So we're not going to the beach today. Let's use another example, one that often causes people to feel paralyzed and ruminate and overthink. Let's say you're trying to decide between moving to a new city or staying where you are. Those are the two options. You stay where you are, or you move to a new city that's, say, 4 hours drive away. This type of decision is a difficult one for many people to make. It often leads to endless rumination and overthinking, sometimes to such a paralyzing level that it affects all other aspects of life. Whichever choice you make, whether you move to the new city or stay where you are, you must lose something. This is the economics of life. We have limited time, energy, and resources, and we can't live in two places at once because we have one physical body, at least for now, until our consciousness gets uploaded to the internet. But by that point, I'll be living far away in my mountain cabin because I've read enough science fiction to know where that leads. Now, when it comes to making decisions, there are three different types of losses. There's objective loss, there's perceived loss, and there's subjective loss. Objective loss is the reality of the situation, what is actually lost. Perceived loss is what you believe will be lost, and that may be true or false. And subjective loss is how important that loss actually is to you in the grand scheme of things. Let's put this in context, coming back to the moving to a new city example. If you stay where you are, you might objectively lose out on career opportunities that can only be had by moving to a new city. We can call that an objective loss. But your perception might be that if you don't move to the new city, then you won't have any good career opportunities. And that's probably not quite true. That's probably you catastrophizing it, right? Or perceiving it as worse than it actually is. Either way, this perception factors into your decision or indecision. If you move to the new city, you might objectively lose out on the ease of access to nature. Perhaps it's a further drive away to get to the hills or the forest. But subjectively, that's not a big deal to you because you're not really a nature person anyway. And so it's not that much of a loss, even though it might be an objective fact of moving to the new city. So we have the reality of the situation, the hard facts, we have the subjective weighting of those losses and gains, and then we have our perception of the situation, which is based on a multitude of things from your personality, your character, your drives, your fears, your hopes, your dreams, your past experiences, trauma, all of that kind of stuff. Because indecision is a function of fear of loss, it largely becomes a problem of commitment. Commitment by nature requires that you incur loss because otherwise it wouldn't be commitment. It wouldn't feel like commitment. You'd just be doing it, right? Because you wouldn't need to think about it. It would just be so obvious. It would be so easy. When you finally commit to a decision, you've counted the cost. You've realized with some level of confidence, even if it's unconsciously, that you have more to gain than to lose by making that commitment. And so you move to the new city despite the losses that you incur by doing so. Perhaps you can't spend as much time with family, but you get the gain of, expansive career opportunities and so forth, which maybe you value more highly at this point in time in your life. So we've looked at these three types of losses, and this is important because Loss, not gain, is what drives indecision. So many years ago, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky figured out that people have a tendency to prefer avoiding losses than acquiring equivalent gains. What they found is, for example, the displeasure of losing $100 is felt more intensely. It's a more intense emotional experience than the pleasure of gaining the same amount. This is called loss aversion, and it's at the root of our indecision, because when we're stuck between deciding to move to a new city or stay where we are, we tell ourselves that we're trying to maximize our life and our potential, and we're focused on the gain and the benefit, which is true. But what holds us back is our fear of loss, our desire to avoid loss. But we can't do this. We can't avoid loss. There's no reality where you make a commitment like moving to a new city or starting a business or even just working on a 2-week project and you don't incur some loss. That's not how life works. Now, instead of trying to ignore loss aversion and pretend that it doesn't exist and try to suppress it, we can actually use it to our benefit. We can use it to shorten our decision-making timeframes and pull ourselves out of this cycle of indecision, this analysis paralysis that holds us back. So let's talk about how to do that. As I mentioned at the start of this video, this is an extremely powerful mental tool that's absolutely changed the game for me. So we want to avoid and mitigate loss. That's why we get stuck in indecision in the first place, because we keep running through these scenarios in our head and we can't get a clear picture of the gain versus the loss that gives us some comfort and confidence and ease. And so we don't act. We continue ruminating. We can't find the certainty that we so desperately crave. But when we're stuck in this cycle, when we're stuck overthinking and in paralysis, we are incurring loss every day, every hour, and every minute that we stay in that state. Primarily, we lose time. There's an opportunity cost to ruminating and overthinking, and that is that you could be taking real action and be in forward motion, things that almost always help you get closer to the clarity that you seek compared to just thinking about the situation. Every hour that you spend in indecision is an hour that you could be spending doing something. Secondarily, and maybe even more important, is that the longer you stay in this state of indecision, the more energy, confidence, and momentum you lose. You know what I'm talking about. If you've spent months in this state, you don't feel good. You feel kind of powerless. You feel less optimistic. Life's just not as fulfilling. And so we have this third dimension to our decision making. We're not just considering the loss with each choice we're faced with, moving to a new city or staying where we are. We have to consider the loss of time, energy, confidence, momentum that comes from delaying that decision. There's a great story from Dan Ariely in his book, Predictably Irrational, where he writes about this friend of his who spent 3 months selecting a digital camera from 2 nearly identical models. Quote from the book: "When he finally made his selection, I asked him how many photo opportunities had he missed, how much of his valuable time he had spent making the selection, and how much he would have paid to have digital pictures of his family and friends documenting the last 3 months. More than the price of the camera," he said. So hopefully you're starting to see how irrational it is to remain in this state of indecision longer than necessary. I say longer than necessary because some decisions do require that you sit on them, especially something like moving to a new city. You probably shouldn't make that decision in like 5 minutes, right? It takes time to think through, it takes time to ponder. But for most decisions, even slightly larger ones, this remaining in analysis paralysis is costly. One of the more painful experiences I've had was when I spent a good 1 to 2 years in this state of indecision. It's embarrassing for me to admit this. My business was working well, and I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. Right? I had a lot of time, decent amount of freedom and kind of optionality. And so I played around with a few projects, but I kept falling back into the overthinking cycle. And when I look back on this period, I cringe because I think about how much time I wasted and how much further ahead I'd be right now if I just committed to something, anything, even if it didn't feel like the perfect thing at the time. But it wasn't just that objective loss of time. It was the subjective feeling, how I saw myself, right? This is important. It shouldn't be understated. Consider how you feel when you're in a state of forward motion, when you're in momentum. You're achieving things, you're finishing things, you're making progress on something. You see a world of possibilities. You're optimistic, you're challenging yourself. You feel powerful, right? You feel like you have some sense of control over your life. Now consider how you feel when you lack momentum, when you're in this state of indecision. You're stuck, you're paralyzed, you're not working hard, you're not finishing things, you're less optimistic, you're not in motion, you feel less in control. Life is not as good as it could be. Consider the cost of spending weeks or months or even years in this negative state, especially when the alternative is to be in the positive state of forward motion and momentum, even if you're uncertain about where you're going. The loss incurred by being in this negative state is immense, and it contains its own inertia, which is why people don't often snap themselves out of this analysis paralysis unless some sort of external event triggers that. They often have to build their way out of it by taking small, consistent actions and building the momentum back up. Let's consider how you can use this third dimension reframe for something that I've seen a lot of people struggle with, and I struggle with myself. Maybe you want to work on a side hustle or a side project, and you have three options that you're trying to decide between, and you keep overthinking it, right? Because as soon as you start thinking about option A, you start thinking about option B and option C, and maybe this would be better, and if I do this, and this happens, and so on and so on and so on. You're spinning your wheels, nothing's working. And let's say you've spent an entire month thinking about this so far, and you're not any closer to committing. When you use the third dimension reframe on this situation, you first consider painfully the loss that you've already incurred. This is painful. It's hard because you have to face reality. You have to admit to yourself that you've wasted a lot of time. That's not easy, but it's much better than lying to yourself about how if you just delay the decision longer, something's going to work out for you. That's not usually the case. So you consider the loss that you've incurred. A month is a long time. That's 30 days of would-be progress on something. And then you want to subjugate. You want to lower the decision between which side hustle, which side project should I work on, to a more important and much simpler decision, which is, do I want to commit to something, or do I want to keep incurring the loss that comes with delaying the decision? The answer to that should be obvious, right? It should be, I want to commit to something. And when you reframe it that way, the option you pick, the side hustle you pick, it doesn't matter as much anymore, because any loss that comes with choosing a suboptimal one doesn't compare to the more significant loss that comes from delaying the decision. The answer to the question of what side hustle should I work on is any of them, because taking action and going down a path and making a commitment lets you avoid the loss that comes from delaying that decision. Plus, you'll feel a lot better when you have momentum and you're in motion. So thank you for watching. I hope this video helped. And if you liked it, let me know in the comments below.